I shouldn't have been staring, but there was something about the way she moved behind the counter that made it impossible not to. Not that she noticed. I was just another young guy wandering into her bookstore. The smell of old paper and lemon-scented polish clung to the air, warm and faintly dizzying, the kind of smell that felt like it belonged to secrets. She leaned over, straightening a stack of vintage postcards, her sleeves rolled up to just below the elbow, and for a second, her hair caught the sunlight in a way that made my chest tighten. I'd met her once before, at a summer barbecue my girlfriend dragged me to. That was months ago, and I'd barely spoken to her, except for some polite nods. But there was something lingering, some unspoken energy I couldn't place. She had a presence that made the room bend slightly around her. Confident, yes, but not in a way that pushed people away. It drew you in, quietly, like a tide you didn't notice until you were halfway in. I was fiddling with the strap of my bag when she finally looked up at me, and I swear, she smiled. But not the polite, surface-level kind of smile you offer strangers. This was a little private, a little sharp-edged, like she had noticed something in me I didn't even know I'd shown. "Can I help you find something?" Her voice was calm, measured, like she had all the time in the world but had chosen to focus on me. Yeah, I'm just browsing." I forced a laugh, my throat tight. She tilted her head slightly, and I noticed the small details. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the faint perfume that was floral, not overpowering. She had the kind of hands that looked soft and deliberate, like she knew exactly how to place something down without disturbing the world around it. She reached across the counter to hand me a small notebook I'd picked up, and our fingers brushed. Just a second, and yet I felt a spark of something electric that had nothing to do with the notebook. "I like that one," she said, nodding toward the notebook. "My sister keeps journals like this. She's organized." There was a pause, a flicker in her eyes that made me wonder if she was testing me somehow. I shrugged, my words catching in my throat. "Yeah, it seems solid. Too vague. Too clumsy." She leaned in slightly, closer than necessary, not aggressively, just close enough that I could smell the faint hint of vanilla and sandalwood in her hair. "Can I tell you something?" The words barely rose above a whisper, yet they cut through the quiet hum of the store. I froze. My brain short-circuited. What? Why? Was it something about the notebook? Something about me? She didn't wait for an answer, just held my gaze, and in that moment, I realized I was completely undone. And then she pulled back, smoothing her blouse as though nothing had happened. She gave me a half-smile, professional and calm again, but the pause, the brush of her fingers, the weight of those words, hung in the air like a note I couldn't stop replaying. I left the store with my purchase, but every step toward the door felt slower than it should. I kept thinking about the way she leaned in, the hint of a secret I was only allowed to glimpse. Something in me had shifted, though I didn't know what it was yet. And the truth? I couldn't stop thinking about it. The question she'd asked, her voice so close, so soft, like a key turning in a lock I hadn't realized existed. It wasn't supposed to happen again. I told myself I'd keep it casual this time, just browsing, helping her move a few boxes, grabbing a new shipment from the back. The bookstore smelled of cedar now, mixed with the faint tang of coffee she kept in a chipped mug on the counter. Sunlight fell through the high windows in slanted rectangles, dust motes dancing in the warmth, like the world was holding its breath just for us. She was crouched on the floor, sorting a stack of returned novels, and I noticed the small sigh she let out when a paperback slipped from her hands. Her hair had fallen loose around her face, and there was a faint crease at her temple, a sign she hadn't slept well, or maybe she hadn't bothered to hide it. "Here, I can, help with that?" I said, bending down beside her. She glanced up, eyes sharp for a fraction of a second before softening. "Thanks," she murmured. Short, clipped, but her voice carried something underneath I couldn't place. Hesitation? Weariness? Maybe both. I handed her the book, and for a moment our fingers brushed again. Just a second, barely enough to notice, but it was like an electric current that refused to die. I wanted to pull back, to pretend it didn't mean anything, but I couldn't. "You're always organized," I said, trying to make conversation, fumbling for neutrality. "I don't know how you keep track of all this." Her laugh was quiet, a little strained, almost a whisper, like she'd forgotten how to let it out fully. I don't, she said. I just try not to lose everything at once. Her eyes flicked away, scanning the shelves, not meeting mine, but I noticed the way her fingers fidgeted with the corner of a book cover. Small gestures, tiny cracks in the calm facade she held. I stayed quiet, letting her set the rhythm. The more I watched, the more details pulled me in. How her shoulders slumped slightly when she thought no one was looking. How her left hand absent-mindedly brushed against the stack of books she'd just sorted, as if grounding herself. The bookstore felt heavier somehow, the sunlight warmer, the air almost too still. You work too hard, I said finally, careful not to sound accusatory. She shook her head, but her lips twitched in the faintest of smiles. I'm used to it. Doesn't bother me. I didn't push. I just watched, cataloging everything. The small size, the way her eyes softened when she glanced at the window, the faint tremor in her hands when she stacked another pile of novels. Vulnerability hiding behind competence, like a secret she didn't want me to see but couldn't quite hide. Then she stood, stretching her arms above her head, and I noticed the subtle curve of her neck, the quiet shift of weight as she exhaled. She glanced at me, a quick, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that we both knew the air between us had changed. And in that moment, just before she turned away, her hand brushed mine again. This time longer, deliberate, almost casual. My heart raced, though I tried to keep my face neutral. Her eyes flicked up, caught mine, and held them for a second too long, before she stepped back and smiled softly, like nothing had happened, but everything had. I left that afternoon with my thoughts tangled, replaying that brush of fingers, the half-smile that carried a question she didn't ask aloud, and the slow, undeniable pull that had begun to take hold. The rain had started as a drizzle, then turned into a steady hammer against the windows. The bookstore was nearly empty, just the two of us surrounded by shelves that smelled faintly of ink and cedar. She was perched on a ladder, reorganizing a top shelf, and I was standing below, holding a stack of books she'd passed down. The sound of the storm outside made everything feel suspended, like the world had shrunk to just this room, just this moment. You're holding those wrong, she said suddenly, her voice calm but precise. Here, let me. She stepped closer to adjust my grip, and for a heartbeat our hands touched. Not brushing casually, but the way our fingers lingered, almost consciously, almost dangerously. My chest tightened, and I swallowed, trying to focus on the books instead of the sudden heat in my veins. Sorry, I muttered, stepping back slightly. She didn't reply, just straightened and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Her hair fell over one shoulder, wet from the rain that had blown in through the open door earlier, and there was a softness in her expression I hadn't seen before. Vulnerable, but guarded, like she was letting me in just a fraction and immediately regretting it. I wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the gap. It's nice, the rain, I said stupidly. She gave a short laugh, shaking her head. You think small talk will save you now? Her eyes twinkled with mischief. Or was it a warning? I couldn't tell. We worked in silence for a while, the quiet only punctuated by the rain and the occasional creak of the ladder. I noticed the faint shadows under her eyes, the way her lips pressed together when she concentrated, the tremor in her fingers when she shifted the heavier books. And somehow, every detail made her more magnetic, more untouchable. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, hesitation flickering across her face. I glimpsed the name before she silenced it, someone from her past, someone I wasn't supposed to think about. She exhaled sharply, a little too fast, and turned away from me. I wanted to ask, to say something comforting, but I didn't. I stayed quiet, feeling like an intruder in her storm, a storm she hadn't invited me into. Later, when the rain had eased slightly, she asked me to help carry some boxes to the back room. We were cramped together in the narrow hallway, shoulder to shoulder, and the air was thick with that unsaid tension. I could feel her breath brush past my ear, and for a second, I thought she might lean closer, might speak the words neither of us dared to voice. But she didn't. She stopped, shifted the boxes to the side, and glanced at me with a faint, almost painful smile. "Thanks," she said softly, and that was it. I wanted to say more, so many things, but I let it go. Let her slip back behind the walls she built so carefully. Still, as I stepped back, as we both turned away, I couldn't shake the feeling that for a fleeting second, something almost happened, something forbidden, something that would change everything if it did. And in the quiet aftermath, I found myself wondering whether that moment, that near connection, would haunt me for far longer than I wanted to admit. We ended up in the small back office, sorting invoices and receipts, though neither of us touched the papers for the last 10 minutes. The room smelled faintly of dust and coffee, warm from the overhead lamp, and the rain had slowed to a soft drizzle outside. I was stacking envelopes when I realized she wasn't moving at all, just sitting in the chair, hands folded, staring at the floor. I cleared my throat. "You okay?" She looked up slowly, eyes shadowed, almost unreadable. "I don't know," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't trembling, but it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I swallowed. "I mean, is this about earlier?" My words sounded too small, too cautious. She shook her head, and for a second, the motion made her hair fall across her face. She pushed it back, slowly, deliberately, then let her gaze settle on me. "No," she said, almost to herself. Then louder, to me, I don't know what we're doing, or why this keeps happening." I froze. There it was, the acknowledgement. The thing we danced around for weeks, unspoken but undeniable. My chest tightened, and I felt the heat rising in my face, though I tried to look calm. "I mean," she continued, leaning forward slightly, elbows on her knees, voice soft but edged with frustration. "We're not supposed to, this isn't, you know what I mean." And yet, she trailed off, eyes flicking to the side, then back to mine, a tiny glimmer of vulnerability breaking through her composed mask. I wanted to speak, to reach out, to fix it somehow, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, trying to convey understanding without saying too much. My heart was racing, and every instinct screamed to close the distance between us, but something stopped me. Respect? Fear? Or maybe the recognition that some things couldn't be fixed with a hand on a shoulder. The silence stretched. Thick. Heavy. We could hear the faint drip of rain from the corner of the ceiling, the low hum of the heater, our own breathing filling the gaps. In that silence, I saw everything. The tension, the restraint, the tiny cracks we both carried. Finally, she spoke again, voice barely above a whisper. "I shouldn't want this," she said. Her fingers twitched on her lap. "I shouldn't want to feel like this around you." My throat tightened. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. I was trapped between wanting to confess, to reach out, to make sense of it, and knowing that whatever I said would change things irreversibly. She leaned back, exhaling sharply, eyes downcast. And then, almost too quiet to hear, she added, "But I do. I can't. I can't stop thinking about it. Or you. And that terrifies me." I stayed frozen, feeling my stomach knot, knowing that whatever came next, we couldn't go back to pretending this was normal. The air between us had shifted. The unspoken had been spoken. And when she finally looked at me, it was with a mixture of fear and resignation, as if she was exposing a part of herself that she had promised no one would ever see. I wanted to say something, anything, but the only thing that came to mind was the truth, raw and unfiltered. I knew exactly how she felt. She had left the back office door cracked open, though no one was walking past. I was shelving a few books when I noticed a small photo tucked behind a stack of receipts, a faded picture of a younger version of her, sitting on a park bench with someone whose face I didn't recognize at first. Her hand hovered over it, hesitating. Then she picked it up and held it carefully, like it could shatter at any moment. I didn't move. I didn't want to intrude, but the sight of her fingers tracing the edge of the photo stopped me in my tracks. "Who's that?" I asked softly. She looked up, startled, then blinked rapidly, as though she hadn't expected to admit it to anyone. It's someone I lost a long time ago," she said, her voice low, almost trembling. "My first real heartbreak. I didn't think I'd ever talk about it again." I nodded, uncertain what to say. Her eyes flicked away, tracing some invisible pattern on the floor. It was years ago, she continued. I thought I'd moved on, but sometimes you don't. You just pretend. Her honesty hit me harder than I expected. There was no melodrama, no accusations, just the quiet weight of a wound she'd carried alone. I could see the faint tremor in her hands, the way she held the photo to her chest, the subtle catch in her breath. I had someone once, too, I said quietly, realizing I was stepping into confessional territory I hadn't planned. Not the same, but I know that feeling. The one that sticks with you. Her head turned slowly toward me. There was a flash in her eyes, recognition, surprise, maybe even relief. For a moment, the room seemed smaller, the rain outside irrelevant, because the air between us had shifted again. Vulnerability had opened a door neither of us had fully realized was there. She sighed, finally placing the photo back behind the receipts. I don't usually let anyone see that side of me, she admitted. Not really. And I don't even know why I'm telling you now. I wanted to say something comforting, but I couldn't. I just nodded and met her gaze, letting the silence carry what words couldn't. And in that silence, I realized that something had changed. The careful boundaries she had maintained, the ones I had respected, even feared, felt fragile now, like glass catching the light. She smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes completely. Maybe it's the rain, she said softly, almost joking, almost serious. Or maybe it's you. I don't know. I felt my chest tighten, not from desire exactly, but from the raw humanity of the moment. Someone had let me in, someone I wasn't supposed to understand so completely, someone I'd been watching from the edges of my own restraint. And then, almost imperceptibly, her fingers brushed mine as she passed me the stack of books again. Just a touch, a whisper of contact, and yet it reverberated through me in a way that words could never reach. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I just let the moment exist, fragile, perfect, devastating in its simplicity. It was late afternoon, and the bookstore had emptied. The golden light of the low sun spilled across the shelves, dust motes drifting lazily through the warm air. She was at the counter, counting receipts, and I was leaning against the doorframe, unsure how long I'd been standing there. Neither of us spoke at first. The room carried the quiet weight of shared understanding, and for the first time, it felt like neither of us had to pretend. You're still here, she said finally, not as a question, but as an observation. I couldn't leave, I admitted quietly. She looked up, a faint, tired smile brushing her lips. Neither could I. I didn't move closer, not yet. I didn't have to. The space between us hummed with unspoken acknowledgement, the understanding that everything we had felt, all the tension, the hesitation, the small revelations, had led here. Not to some dramatic confession, not to a fairy tale, but to this quiet inevitability. She set the last receipt down, wiped her hands on her apron, and sat on the edge of the counter. I hesitated, then pulled a chair close enough that our knees almost touched. Neither of us spoke. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the counter, the way her gaze softened as it met mine. She wasn't smiling widely. She wasn't laughing. She was simply present. And in that presence, I felt everything else fall away. You know, she said softly, almost to herself, I never thought I'd be like this again. With someone. After everything. I nodded, feeling the same weight of truth settle over me. Me neither, I whispered. There was no rush, no need to speak the words we both wanted to. Instead, our hands brushed as I reached to adjust the chair, and for the first time, neither of us flinched. Just a touch. A light, deliberate contact that said more than words ever could. She let her hand stay against mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. I could feel the warmth of her skin, the subtle pulse of her heartbeat beneath her fingers. It was grounding, honest, and terrifying in its simplicity. And yet it felt right. We sat like that for several minutes, letting the quiet fill the space between us. No confessions, no promises, just the awareness that we were here, together, and that it didn't need anything else to exist. Finally, she leaned her forehead briefly against my shoulder, not as a declaration, not as surrender, but as acknowledgement. as if we'd both been holding our breath for weeks, and now we could exhale. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The warmth, the proximity, the small, careful gestures, all of it spoke for us. And in that silence, in that shared stillness, everything shifted. We stayed there, side by side, letting the quiet define us, letting the world continue outside without forcing it in. It was simple. It was fragile. It was ours. I still remember that late afternoon in the bookstore, though it feels like a lifetime ago. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets outside wet and glistening, and inside, the golden light spilled across the shelves like it had been waiting just for us. I can still feel the warmth of her hand brushing mine, that quiet acknowledgement that neither of us needed to define what we were feeling. It changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I learned that restraint could be more powerful than rush, that the spaces between words sometimes carry more weight than the words themselves. I learned to notice the small things, the way someone tilts their head when they're unsure, the slight tremor in a smile that hides vulnerability, the moments of silence that are louder than any confession. And her? I think she learned that letting someone in doesn't have to be catastrophic. That softness doesn't mean weakness, and that connection, real, messy, human connection, is earned, not demanded. Watching her, seeing her allow herself to trust me, even just a fraction, changed how I understood the weight of patience, of subtlety, of intimacy that doesn't announce itself. Our story didn't erupt in fireworks or grand gestures. There were no cinematic declarations or perfect resolutions. It lived in the small, imperceptible moments, the brush of fingers, the shared quiet, the soft exhale of a forehead resting against a shoulder. That's where it mattered. That's where love, or whatever this was, quietly took hold. Time has stretched those moments into memories I revisit often. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at nothing, or pausing in the middle of a crowded street, remembering the way her hair fell over her shoulder in that golden light, the faint scent that clung to her like an invisible tether. And I realize that love doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and it lingers long after the world has moved on. I don't know what the future held for us beyond that day, and perhaps that's the point. The beauty wasn't in certainty. It was in the understanding we shared, in the awareness that we had met each other fully, without pretending, without fear. That lesson, about patience, about trust, about the fragility and brilliance of human connection, is one I carry with me still. And maybe that's the thing I've learned most. That love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be real. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?